I suppose for a lot of the content that's put out there now, it's far less text based and more video based. It's a bit more grabby. And I suppose maybe that's something you can talk about at length. I suppose you've been involved in kind of the sphere, coaching sphere, for a
It's
while.
definitely different than when I think I first started on Instagram in 2015. And as you say, it was back, if I went back to 2011 and 12, there was a lot of reading. T Nation was a big thing. Poliquin was still a big thing. So a check was even a pretty big thing. And it was all, you would read it. PT on the net was a thing. That might be before your time, possibly a little bit as well. But yeah, you would read, because YouTube wasn't like what it is now.
No.
And video content just, it wasn't a thing. Like no one would, I mean, maybe there'd be a few videos, but they'd almost be like live streamed things. They weren't what they are now, which are effectively little films if you're making, or little documentaries if you're making stuff like that. The quality on video content in particular has sort of skyrocketed. I think that's had an influence on lots of other things as well. Like it used to be you'd press record and you'd get away with ums and ahs and mistakes and bumbling your way to a point and not being particularly engaging or interesting. And that's just not the case now. Like if you're making filmed content, you have to script that stuff. You need a bunch of good ideas. It needs to be edited, because you're up against everyone else doing that. And if you don't, you'll probably lose out, because the odds are you're not as naturally interesting or quick to the point or as relevant as you think you're being. And so everyone else's attention will just piss off to someone who's doing it better. And so that's kind of changed.
It does require quite a different skill set when you're talking to the camera, though. Like I remember the very first
Yeah.
time I ever actually recorded myself speaking and putting it up on the internet. The video itself was like 6 or 7 minutes long, not edited at all. Me stumbling,
Yep.
ums, ahs, all that kind of stuff, and like, there's no way that could go down or get put on social media now. Like, you'd get maybe, I don't know, 10 seconds if you're lucky in terms of retention time, and then after that, kind of falls down the wayside. But I remember like putting up that post, it got loads of likes at the time because like not many people were putting out video content.
Yeah. Yeah, I also like the fact that for Shane, there's no way you blinked for like the full 6 minutes of that video as well. And I'd have stayed watching. I'd have stayed watching just for that.
Oh, lad, you are
Right.
getting eaten alive. Paul is going to be a mainstay here. This is great. Spain story has entered the chat. I'll when we finish
When
recording,
I first
Paul,
met Shane, I was
Paul,
just like, man, this guy hasn't blinked for half a day.
I'll tell you when we finish recording. I'll tell you his nickname in the powerlifting club where we both train.
I look forward to hearing it.
Yeah. But for you, in that time, I suppose we're talking nearly a 9-year span.
Mhm.
Where do you see it kind of going as regards content creation and maybe engaging an audience? Because I suppose for the vast majority of people, they're content consumers.
Yep.
And I suppose it's a very, very small amount of people that are actually creating the content and maybe changing the direction of it. And I suppose for me, one of the intimidating aspects of it is when you look at the setup that some people have, and I suppose it is quite the Matthew principle probably does apply, that people with larger audiences have the means and the facilities to create that kind of like high level engaging content that you were talking about. So where do people start and where's it going? Maybe
That's
two
fair.
separate questions.
Yeah, as you say, it's almost like you're up against fucking Sky Sports now with content creation thing, which is, there's cameramen and editors, and that becomes the whole job. And when you're starting out, you're a small content creator, and you're doing probably all of those tasks yourself. I don't think it's impossible to overcome that, but I do think it's more difficult, and you do have to learn a bunch of skills that have nothing immediately to do with coaching, which is where coaches probably go wrong with it. They think if I talk about the stuff I'm naturally interested in, everyone will listen somehow, or that it'll feel relevant to people. Right. coaches often think I can help a wide variety of people, which is often true. They can help a wide variety of people. And so there's a resistance to wanting to, it gets called niche down your content, make content that's aimed for a particular type of person. Because in person, I work with Sally, who's 93 years old with 8 fake hips. And I also work with Joe, who's 22 years old, who wants to get jacked for a lad's holiday somewhere. And I like working with this wide variety of people. I'm basically describing myself when I first got into making content. I didn't understand why I needed a niche. And it's the reason you need a niche isn't because you can't help a wide variety of people. It's that you can't hold the attention of a wide variety of people simultaneously, because it won't feel like it's relevant to Sally at 97 and Joe at 22. Those two people very rarely watch the same bit of content or use the same language. And if you're not doing that, those people will just scroll on by. And you could have helped them, but they paid you no attention because it didn't feel relevant to them. So I think when you're starting to make content, you have to figure out, who am I trying to help a little bit? Who am I best placed to help? Who do I want to work with? And then how do I make content that is engaging for those people? And that takes fucking time, because you're like, look, every trainer under the sun is going to make content that at some point talks about protein, at some point talks about how to train, right? At some point talks about your mindset when you meet difficult moments and how you get through them, right? And scheduling your diary and all the rest of the stuff that every fitness professional under the sun will talk about, because of course we will. But how do you make that feel interesting and relevant to Shane or Lawrence is going to be different than if I was doing it for a Weight Watchers audience or someone else. It's not that the topics themselves are different per se, but the language you use, whether I say, tummy or belly fat or adipose tissue, well, who am I trying to talk to? Because those are 3 different terms depending on the audience that we're doing. So I think one of the big bits with content is trying to actually take yourself out of you and try and see it through the consumer, quote unquote, eyes, and what would be interesting to them, and what words would they use, and what hooks and angles would bring them in, and how do I present that in a visually engaging way, and have I bothered to script anything and write, like, there's so much of this stuff that has absolutely fuck all to do with you teaching anyone to squat, that it's just a completely new set of skills that most coaches don't have, and while you learn, you're going to suck at. Which means you're going to have to put in a year of making content while it's not very good, which means it won't get that much traction, probably. So you'll feel bad about yourself while doing it. It won't bring in as much business as you'd like because you suck at it, but you have to go through the sucking at it phase to get to the point where you can do it well. That all of that is, I think that's an inevitability. You can speed it up. Some people do it faster than others, blah, blah, blah. But I think because there are so many, whether it's overweight people or people struggling with knee stuff or people wanting to look a certain way or blah, 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 there's a huge audience out there. And so you kind of, to some degree, don't have to compete with the Sky Sports equivalent fitness people. Some of the things, once you get okay at making content, some of the stuff that makes you stand out is cliched as it is you and your personality and your quirks and the stuff that goes on in your life that makes you kind of interesting and that people will connect with you, because even though it's online, it's still called personal training, and we still like to have a bond with our coach and the people around us. And so I think you have to lean into that aspect of treating it as though you're building relationships as well as creating content. And if you can kind of do both of those worlds, you can have a perfectly successful career, even if your content doesn't look like the most amazing thing of all time. So I don't know if I fully answered the question on that particular thing, but that's apparently where I've taken it.
No, you did absolutely. I think even from what you were saying there, towards the end, the personal end of it, I think that's for me, it's probably what drives a lot of the content I would consume. I know it's not a fitness podcast, but I don't know, do either of you listen to the Lex Friedman podcast? Yeah. I think that's such it's such an interesting podcast to listen to, because you really feel like you're dropped in to a conversation. It's a little bit awkward at times, and he's probably not the most charismatic person to listen to, but I really like it because you kind of feel like you know him, and he comes across as quite vulnerable. And then maybe on the other end of that, I suppose you have Sam Sulek, who's
Mhm.
again kind of a funny person to listen to, but he just listens to, or he just records stuff on an iPhone, I'm fairly sure, and just lobs up a whole training session.
Yeah, he's one I know less about Sam Sulek other than his name and having seen a couple of very small clips. But he seems to be the outlier in not editing, not doing too much, blah blah blah. It's like when you look at him, you go, okay, jacked dude in great shape. So he's got that going for him. So if you've got a phenomenal physique, obviously steroids play a role in that particular one, which is just the nature of said beast. I think you can get away with a lot more if you look a certain way. If you're smoking hot, you can get away with being boring to some degree, right? If you're C-Bum, now C-Bum has editors and does loads of stuff, but even if he didn't, C-Bum would still get a load of attention and interaction with plain boring shit that he put up because you'd be like, oh my fucking God, right? Most of us, sadly, aren't going to be able to ride that strategy, I don't think, all that well. There will be an outlier, but I don't see them being consistent ones. But I do think that bit that you kind of said of, I'm the same as you. I like podcasts that feel like I get to know the people in it. I sometimes describe it almost as, it's like having some friends around when you can't be asked to talk. Like, I don't want to contribute. I'm cooking, but I just want to feel like the people that I like that are talking about shit that I'm vaguely interested in and having a kind of nice time, and they're kind of funny and engaging and likable while they do it. It's like, there's a big space for shit like that. Podcasts are a slightly different space. There is more room for the and the and the thinking and all of that, as long as we're somewhat interested in the discussions that take place. And the fact that you like Lex Friedman tells us something about the kinds of things that you might be interested in, blah, 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 if you were thinking from a content creator's perspective. Like, I could use references and go, cool, Lawrence will know who Eric Weinstein is, and I could rough it on. So those bits, right? When you start looking at the world through the content creator eyes, you see stuff in lots of different things. Instagram, TikTok-y things will be different still to that, in that they still will come down to, they need to be quicker, they need to be more to the point. There's less scope for the and the and the debating and taking your time to figure out what you're trying to say. You need to know what you're going to say ahead of time before that thing goes on, otherwise people are going to have disappeared off. But you can still use all that shit. I think most social media stuff should be more entertainment than education. I think that's probably where most fitness professionals go wrong, unless they're aiming at other fitness professionals, which I kind of do. But most people who go on social media are like taking a shit and scrolling on their phone, and they want to laugh, right? When they want to learn, they go on YouTube or they go and Google something. It's like, try and use that stuff to create a connection with things that might make people smile or might make people interested as they watch stuff. Give us some behind the scenes look at your life on your stories. Even if you're not doing anything particularly interesting, you just be sat at your desk with a coffee recording a podcast. It's like, you can give us that thing. I just then want some opinion on it, some view on it. And honestly, it can be really fucking simple shit of just being like, Nescafe, do the best decaf coffee, and I will fight any midget who wants to argue with me otherwise, right? I'm drinking a Nescafe decaf coffee. I could have just put that picture up and go, Nescafe, decaf coffee, smile, right? But it would be a bit dull. I'm trying to deliberately do a thing that just makes someone who has my sort of sense of humor a little bit smile and enjoy watching my stories most of the time. Because the more they do that, the more they're likely to reach out or go, yeah, Nescafe is the best of the decaf coffees. I fucking agree. Or, they like playing Final Fantasy VII as well, because I stuck that up yesterday, right? Like, if that's the shit that you like doing, let people in on that personality stuff. Like, they don't have to agree and like every bit of it, but getting to know you is, I think, a huge part of most people reaching out to you as a coach if you don't happen to be C-Bum. And if, like, do you guys know the Business and Banter boys as they are now? Biceps and Banter as they used to be, Dan and Mike. So Mike over at, well worth a follow for businessy stuff. I work with Dan for the record. But Mike talks about people needing three things if they want to buy something from you. One of which is they need to like and know you. The other one is they need to think that you can solve their problem or problems. And the third one is they have to be ready to buy something. You can do something about two of those and not one of them. You can't really affect whether it's the right time for the person to reach out and to make a change in their life. but you can definitely impact whether or not they know you and like you, and whether or not they think you can solve their problems. So it's like, if you haven't put out anything that has your personality in it, who the fuck is there to like? When I look at most fitness content of even my own clients and stuff, I'm like, man, it's boring. It has none of you in it. When I have a conversation with you, none of that comes through in the content that I see at the other end of it. It's like, there's this disconnect between who they are as people and the fun person they are to hang out with all their quirks and idiosyncrasies, and the person that I'm seeing really boringly try and tell me about how much protein's in a chicken breast. And it's like, okay, so we can close that gap. And then does it feel like we can solve their problem? Well, if we haven't clearly defined who that person is, what kind of problems in the language that they use, demonstrate it regularly, then they might like you, but they might they might not think you're any good at solving the issues that they've particularly got. So it's like, our content needs to do, and I agree with Mike on this, needs to do those two things, and then give it enough time. Hopefully, eventually people will buy things from you. But there's like a long lead time. I always ask, and any of the in-person days we do, or people who sign up for coaching with me, like, how long have you followed me? And usually the answer is it's at least a year. It's between 1 to 2 years, I would say, is the average. You find some people who take action after 3 months, 6 months type thing. So you do find the shorter ones, but usually it's a year or so. There are some people it's like 4 fucking years. Like, do you know how much content I've had to create over 4 to 5 years to get you bastards to pay me my business money, right? It's like, I think you have to know that going in a little bit. You can definitely get there faster and sooner, but if none of your shit is fun, seems like you, etc., doesn't help us get to like and know you and demonstrate regularly that you can solve the kind of problems that that person has, say, yeah, you probably won't have a business that's doing as well as it could do based on the skills you probably have as a coach.
Yeah, I think like it's so important even to just be consistent with showing up. Like, as you said at the very start, your content is probably going to be shit, and it's hopefully going to get better over time. Like, as you look at like the insights, you look at the amount of likes you get, the amount of saves you get, the amount of shares you get, the amount of people who are giving you feedback, like using that as like information to kind of make better content, but ultimately just continuing to post. Like, I've talked to a lot of people like in Ireland who are great coaches, but they don't post on Instagram because they want it to be perfect. And
yeah,
like, my content is far from perfect. It could be much better. Like, you know, we see other people again making this like state of the art content, and that's not what mine is. But because I keep posting, I eventually do get people contacting me for coaching. Right? You were mentioning there about lead time. Like, I worked with 3DMJ there for my bodybuilding prep. I started following them in 2015, and I only contacted them in 2022. You know, because that was the right time for me to kind of reach out for the services. It's when I could afford them. So but if they stop posting, stop putting out like social media content and kind of sharing their kind of philosophy and all that, I probably would have went on to somebody else. You know, so there's a lot of power and continue to show up.
There's that thing of going, like, sometimes when people talk about leads, like, did you get any leads this week? Did anyone come in for these things? It's like, well, leads, okay, inquiries and leads you could maybe separate as different things, because you could think of leads as being all the way from the spectrum of they don't know who you are yet to they're buying something from you. And that's a whole process. It's not like a one-step thing. Some people are gradually getting closer to working with you over time. Like, if 3DMJ had decided to can it and pack it all in at 6 years because Shane hadn't reached out yet, well, then they'd have missed out on Shane 7 years in, right? Now, hopefully they had other clients in that time. I'm not suggesting if no one has reached out in 6 years, you're probably doing it badly. You should get some guidance. But leads are always at various points along the route from they've come across you to they're ready to buy from you. And you sort of do have to, as Shane's saying, regularly put content out and keep showing up for that. And I think the big bit of what you're saying there is also reflecting on it and trying to figure out what's working and what's not. I would actually really just recommend most people, because it's such a different skill set. Just like we recommend people get coaches, right? Shane got a coach to get shredded for bodybuilding things. And that's not because Shane didn't know how to get shredded. It's just that it's actually helpful and beneficial to have outside eyes sometimes with certain things, especially if it's your first foray into something, or you already think so much about training and diet for everyone else. The last thing you want to do is spend more of your week thinking about it for yourself. Well, I think sometimes coaches forget that they could get feedback and guidance on not necessarily just like business overall, but like their content creation and that's called copywriting, writing persuasively for other people to sell. Again, I would say check out the Business and Banter Boys, check out Simon Mitchell, check out Mike Samuels, although he's a bit more aimed at copywriters these days. Chris Burns is a good one. Suk Sudu. Like, you should probably, if you want to be a great coach, you need clients, and at least online. In person, you don't need to learn about copy, because in person, you can just pick up clients by wandering around the gym floor and helping people, and it's much easier to do than it is online. But if you're trying to succeed online, you will need to build these skills, and therefore you will likely need to invest in them, and you will need critique and feedback on what you're creating and putting out there and going, that's pretty good. That could be a little bit better. That's really boring. That's a terrible idea. That's a great idea. Like all of the stuff that you would do when you learn to squat or bench or do whatever it is in the gym. Like coaching applies to so many facets of our life, and it can speed up the process loads. I could have saved myself years if I... like years, if I'd have got some copy guidance and content guidance like years ago. If I go back to sort of 2018, 19, look at my content, I go, oh my fucking God, right? It's really boring. It's really dry. It gets about 3 likes because I was obsessed with being sciencey, right? Because I was into science. I was into that evidence-based world. I wouldn't recommend anything that I couldn't find a PubMed reference for, right? And that wasn't who my audience were, though. And so I didn't put any time and effort to think, how could I use this information but present it in a usable way for people who aren't super nerdy and into this shit? But I didn't give any consideration to those things. I just used the exact same terms with stuff. I crammed it full of things. There was no storytelling. There was no framing. There was no hook. There was no consideration for attention. There was no redrafting. It was just, here you go. And so I deserved to get 3 or 4 likes for things that took me hours to make because it was self-indulgent bollocks. And yet, here's the funny thing that makes me laugh, and then I'm going to stop ranting, is that I used to talk so much about being evidence-based, but it never occurred to me that there is evidence about what works to help grab people's attention. I never went and looked for that evidence. I never went and found the stuff. I was like, no, evidence-based just has to mean the delivery of scientific information. It's like, no, Paul, you dickhead. It also should apply to how do you get, if you want to be a great coach, you need to actually help a load of people. And if you can't get their attention, you can't help a load of people. So you're selling yourself and your service short by not taking the time to learn what the evidence says works for getting people's attention, holding their attention, and converting them to clients. There's a whole branch of psych and economics and marketing in there that you should delve into and learn from, because you are letting yourself down if you don't, and therefore you're also doing a disservice to people who will go to annoyingly shit coaches who happen to be great at making content and marketing.
I think one thing you said on one of your podcasts a while ago is really important to also note. It was some of your content should be aimed towards gaining people's attention and like grasping kind of new people onto your page. But then a lot of content you should also make should be aimed at, you know, actually kind of building that connection and kind of giving value. Because like, there's only so much like real good information you get through in like a reel. Whereas like if you use a lot of carousels and you do them really well, but you've even put up like the insights up in your story of like the differences between, you know, how many likes they'll get relative to like the amount of saves and stuff like that. And that's obviously helping a lot of coaches, a lot of like people who want to work with you. Whereas like the same information delivered in a reel probably wouldn't have went down that well, or you wouldn't have been able to convey it. Like,
you can do, so I actually repurpose content across formats. So most of the things I make, I'll make as an email, I'll make as a reel, I'll make as a carousel at some point, because I think what is relevant and interesting to your audience will be relevant and interesting in whatever format you want to make it, provided you tweak it appropriately, right? So there are small differences sometimes between what's in a carousel versus what's in a reel. But they're small. They're often like determined by, well, the carousel, the headline space I have is 2 sentences, and I can't shrink that and make that work. So I need to come up with a slightly different sentence to fit into the practical spacing consideration I have for this little bit. And that's a bit too wordy. Whereas in a reel, no, I'm fucking mad. As long as it's concise and to the point and works as an opening line, it's going to work for an opening line. So there's small differences within that. You're absolutely right, though, in going, reels can be used to develop the relationship further, or they could be used for attention grabbing. that you could use them in a variety of ways. Carousels are generally, and I say generally because I have used some as like just entertainment ones. Like if you went on my page and just looked at like, I don't know, the 8 most I can't even remember what the title is. The 8 most fucked up somethings, right? In fact, let me hang on. Right, my phone is near me. We'll just open my own thing and go the 8 absolute worst terms in fitness. Right, I've made that as a reel and as a thing, and that's got like 1,181 likes on it. And that's quite a lot for me. And that's just taking the piss. There's no like value particularly in it in terms of like it's created depth. That's just me laughing at the phrases like drop the hammer and in the trenches and density days and using PPS for plates per side, touching new weights, we move, all of that kind of shit. Stuff that I just thought was funny and annoyed me. And I was like, these are terrible phrases and we need better ones. So you can make carousels that, again, I'm just trying to play on, these are terms that coaches will know, that I think are a bit stupid, that therefore I can make something funny-ish. And it doesn't have to be like funny fucking stand-up ha-ha. It just has to put a slight smile on someone's face. That's the expectation for content. It's not like, my God, that's the best joke I've ever heard. That's not the level people are expecting on their carousel, right? It just might make them smirk a little bit. That's good enough, right? And so just so they'd want to swipe through and be like, yeah, that was fun. I'm glad that kind of went down. And on ones like that, you'll get shares because really what you've shown people is a bunch of stuff they think as well sometimes themselves, but phrased in a funnier way that they want their audience to know that they think. That's why people share stuff. People share stuff so that in their eyes, their audience go, oh, yeah. Or they're trying to show their audience, I think this, and this is just I wish I'd said it this way. That's why people share stuff. With the saves then on carousels, I think carousels are great for, that vague term that is value, right? I think value is about, can your audience do something with the information practically? I think that's probably the best definition of value I could give for people making content. So if you're giving a tip on a bicep curl, is it obvious and can someone practically go away and try it out? If they can, you're likely to get a save type thing on that where they're like, oh, I want to come back to that and check out kind of what he said, right? So value is like, how much practical takeaway is this? Recipes, if you were doing those types of things, could get a lot of saves because people might, if that was their audience, want to go and actually make that meal. I never save recipes because I'm a lazy asshole who likes to just order meal prep in or use the air fryer, right? So, but other people might really enjoy saving those types of things. So value, I would say, is a good proxy for what's your save ratio on anything that you put out that is practically usable. If you don't know Josh Taylor has a rule that I think he calls the 3 Ps: 1 post, 1 point, and 1 practical takeaway. So each post should, what is the 1 point? If you had to distill it to a sentence, what is it? And how do you practically go and do it? Right? And I think that's actually a pretty solid idea when you're thinking of making content to go and play with. So you could do that that could be a reel or a carousel. And then the reels for like attention, those can be reaction reels. So, save stuff on your Instagram that you think is dumb to react to. So obviously I have a bunch of Eddie Abu ones because he's an obvious one at the moment. And I want him to continue making content because it's great to react to, right? Gary Brecker has some. I just stuck one up just before we started this podcast on cold water being the best thing for stripping body fat off you. And I was like, that's definite nonsense. It's not like all the people off the Titanic came out shredded after they'd been in the water for several, right? Because I was like, well, what? And again, when you hear the things that people say, I think one of the things you try and do with it is like, that's fucking dumb and silly, and he's clearly a moron. How could I say this or spoof it or do something that might make someone smile if they saw it? Is usually what I'm trying. Like, what's my way in rather than just going, this is stupid. Right? You could do a little bit of education with it as well, but at least for me and my style, I try and make people smile or laugh a little bit with some of those bits. So it's make notes. God, if you don't do this already, have somewhere where you keep all your ideas. So I use a writing app called Scrivener, but you could use notes on your phone. You could use a Google Doc, whatever, something that's easy to hand because you're going to have ideas all the time. Like when you're just wandering around, you'll have an idea for something, or a client will say something to you and you'll be like, oh, I could use that for whatever. If they're on loads of different places, you lose half of them. So just have one note that I just call content ideas. And then I would scroll back. I mean, God, I've got this idea. So I've got one, a scribbled idea. PT is not a job for everyone. And then the next bit just says list of hard things here, because I haven't come up with them yet, right? But if you can make peace with that and keep going, it can be a great career. That will make PTs who are having a harder time with things go, oh, okay, good. They're likely to engage and kind of like that. I've got one of bodybuilders don't make great Gen Pop coaches because they have about as much psychological understanding of a Gen Pop client as I do with Stephen Bartfuck's fan club. I dislike Stephen Bartfuck. Or anyone who wears Crocs. And I've just got because I don't know. I've just like who other things I could put in there. The most overrated things in fitness 2024. Length and partials, blah, blah, blah. Beyonce, just wanted to put her in there. Crocs, gut health, high rocks, CrossFit, ladies and gentlemen, it's just CrossFit. Bodybuilders giving up steroids just to get back on steroids 6 weeks later when they got a bit smaller than they'd like, have an identity crisis and immediately stuff themselves with a pincushion. 20-year-olds with the faces of a 40-year-old. Yes, you're jacked, but you're aging faster than a banana in a volcano. That's not bad, man. Right. There's training myths that need to die. I don't know where I'm going with this. I have a note here that just says, don't look at the nipple, story of breastfeeding. Fuck knows what the pivot's going to be on that. But you know that thing when someone starts breastfeeding and you've never worked so hard to stare someone in the eyes and not look down at the nipple? Because at any other point, a girl had her nipples out, you'd be like, nipple, right? But when there's a baby latched on, you're suddenly very aware of like, fuck, eyeball, don't blink, right? You turn into Shane, you just don't blink and stare him deeply in the eye, right? And so I was like, anything that comes up at any point, and there's loads more in that thing, I will once a week take that and put it into my writing app with a bunch of ideas. I'll pick a bunch of them and just start scribbling. I think if you're an online coach, you have to treat half of your job as content creation. If you spend 20 hours a week coaching, expect to spend 20 hours a week making content. And that really means writing, filming, editing, emailing, replying to messages on Instagram or whatever thing that you kind of use. Like that, you have to treat that as half your job because it is. You're not entitled to clients. They won't just turn up if you don't do that stuff. So for me, most of my days start with 2 hours of scribbling. And that can be redrafting things. It can be just chucking stuff at. Some things are like, I don't like it. That's not going to kind of go anywhere. But I think the biggest mistake maybe that coaches make with content, whatever they're trying to make, is they just wing it. They don't treat it professionally. They treat it like just something that, oh yeah, I need to get a post out. It's like, that's like just turning up to the gym and going, oh, what are we doing today? Oh, I don't know, right? Every now and again, fine. That's not the worst thing that you can do. At least you turned up to the gym, I suppose. But it's not treating it professionally. It's not treating it like it's your career and your job. And I think you have to make that shift in your head. I'm ranting again, so I apologize for this.
No, the rants are brilliant. I think you touched on a lot of things that I definitely feel, and I definitely am probably the worst online.
You probably aren't the worst. I've seen some bad.
But to put myself out there to create this kind of content, and I suppose it's easy to reduce it down to the Dunning-Kruger and kind of get a bit lazy and be like, oh, do you know, sure, I'm so smart, I just know all the things I don't know, and like, do you know, just that's kind of it. But you said something earlier where you're doing the service, your good service, and the people that you could help, I suppose a disservice, where taking on, and obviously it comes from a place of like maybe a little bit of a perfectionism, or maybe I don't know, an insecurity. Why do I lift? But it is quite hard to overcome that, and I suppose I think of an awful lot of good coaches. Maybe, I don't know, Shane, is it a bit of an Irish thing where are we just an embarrassed, insecure race of people?
I suppose it's the, geez, you must think you're great or something like that. You know, the kind of shameful.
You've fierce notions, that fella, that Lawrence fella, lifting weights, telling me how to lift weights, fool.
Yeah. I did actually have so I'm helping my sister at the moment as part of her Christmas present, and she was telling me that the physio in her job, she works in a hospital, and he was like asking her like, what qualifications does he have? Like, you know, how qualified is he to help you X, Y, and Z? And she was like saying that, like, you know, him as a physio is probably not qualified to help most people that he helps, because like in practice he doesn't train. Maybe he hasn't updated his qualifications and years and years and years. Where, like, you know, when you look at somebody who's like working in our field, especially, like, you know, if you're listening to somebody like Paul on a regular basis, you're probably investing in your education. You're probably trying to upskill yourself, trying to stay in the know and kind of adhere to like best coaching practices as well. So like, yeah, it's I don't even know where it's going off with that fucking story, but anyway.
I get what you're saying, where like for people that are, I find a lot of people that are qualified have nearly superiority complexes. Like I find it definitely where I don't like, people obviously don't talk to me or look at me and think he's doing a PhD, but there is probably an element of it where there's more, people assume you've more skin in the game if you're more qualified, and I think are like qualified, and like they associate educational attainment with like that qualifying you as being good at your job. And in some areas that's quite true. Like if I'm going to a consultant surgeon and he's done his FETAC level 5 in reading and writing, and he hasn't done his I don't know, his postdoc in, I don't know, shoulder orthopedic surgeries, and he's telling me he's going to cut me open, I'm not gonna sit in that.
I don't want there to be a BTEC level 5 in surgery. That I just don't want that to be a thing.
No.
But it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think the fitness industry has got obsessed with looking up to the wrong people. Like PTs look up to researchers all the time. Researchers don't do your job. Physios don't do your job. Nutritionists don't do your job. Like, and I'm saying this as looking at my own career and going, God, I spent so long, you know, bum licking everything that came out of Brad Schoenfeld and Alan Aragon and Lyle McDonald and Eric Helms's mouth. And I was like, and it's not a criticism of those people, but they don't do your job. My job was a PT in a gym. I worked at a David Lloyd for years, and then a gym box in central London, and then a studio. My job wasn't conducting research to find tiny ass differences in 6 people who were going to come in for a 6-week study looking at the leg extension. That has almost no relevance to what you do with your job. Why have we stuck the wrong people on the pedestals? Why are we not looking up to the best personal trainers that the industry has to offer? Why should I give a fuck what a physio says about my job? That ain't my job. That's a physio. Anytime you have someone worrying and like critiquing what you're doing from afar, from a separate field, it's usually their own insecurity. Like, oh, how come this guy's earning more money, or this person's doing this? And it's so super common for coaches to worry, like, oh, if I go and start talking to people on the gym floor, what if other coaches hear what I'm saying and I say something wrong, or this, that, and the other? It's like, I get it, and I understand that fear, because we've all had that fear, but you're looking at it through the wrong pair of eyes. You've got to look at it through the pair of eyes of who's the person I'm trying to help, and whose career am I trying to build? I'm letting people get in my way who have no relevance to me, who aren't useful, who aren't helpful. Because most of the people who are good for you in your career want you to succeed. People who are doing well generally want you to do well as well. This is not a zero-sum game. There are so many fat people in the world, right? There's so much work for PTs. There are so many broken people in the world. There is so much work for PTs that we should, I think the good ones want other people to succeed and pull them up. And one of the things I've seen happen for some of my own, say, mentoring clients, when we've got them to go out and actually pick up clients and start building a career, so they don't earn $2,000 a month and worry about how they're going to pay everything. But, you know, 4, 5, you're like, oh, this could be a career. I can see myself doing this. This is great. Is that those people who were, you know, maybe giving them the judgmental eyes, then start asking them, how did you pick up the clients that you've got? Or where did you learn to do that particular thing? And that judgment ends up becoming envy, because it started from an insecure place in the first instance. And I think you've got to go, it's normal to have those thoughts and fears. I think everyone does. We all sometimes feel like, fuck, I'm stepping out of my lane. Do I really know what the hell I'm talking about here? Right? So I get the fear. I think you'd have to learn to reframe it and go, my job is to help my clients and build my own career. The rest is sort of an irrelevancy. I think, by the way, that is easier also to do if same with everything. If you outsource the guidance, when you have a load of doubts, and you have doubts because you haven't successfully done something yet, because that's how you overcome doubt, right? Is you succeed repeatedly and then you don't doubt. Neither of you boys doubt whether you can walk because you've successfully walked a whole bunch of times, right? But if you hadn't ever walked, you probably should be doubtful as to whether or not you could do that thing. Well, if you haven't successfully done a thing, then the next best thing you can do to reduce your doubts, doesn't take it to zero, is hire someone who has done that thing to guide you through it, right? That is a process, by the way, that things like physios have a better system for than we do as PTs. We don't really have the mentored guidance inbuilt into our careers that we need because our job is primarily practical. And so you can't learn it theoretically by itself. You can't just sit in a classroom, learn a bunch of theory, and then go out and successfully apply it to Karen the accountant. Like, that's not how it works. So you're going to have doubts about every decision you make, every client interaction you have, whether you said the right thing. I think I said the right thing, and then she came back a week later and hadn't changed anything, and she's still in the same boat. Did I say the wrong things? Right? You're going to have all that shit, because of course you are. And it helps to have someone who's been in that boat, who has a bunch of experience, to go, no, you did the right thing here. Maybe you could have tried this, maybe try that, and get that practical mentored guidance and feedback that you would have in most of the other professional fields, because it's not a theoretical field.
We're in a kind of funny time as regards to the online coaching space, and even within the personal training sphere, where if you want to be a physiotherapist, probably a good example, but it's a protected
Title,
profession.
yeah.
It's a protected title. And I think to call yourself a personal trainer or an online coach, it's an extreme, like, it's nearly an abstraction as to what that actually is, and what the job does. And even where you kind of said that researchers are put on pedestals, I think it's probably indicative of the field being in its infancy, where we don't know who to look to. Those people aren't in that position yet. And outside of successful IFBB Pro bodybuilding coaches who are potentially selling drug regimes,
potentially
big
kind,
and instigating borderline rhabdo in their athletes, like, where who do we look to? And I think where, like, I always tread carefully with, like, kind of like research outputs or anything like that, and I would be quite slow to put my own research on social media, because a lot of scientists and exercise scientists don't understand exercise science, and that sounds really funny to say, but if I put up the results of my study and I'm looking at, like, p-values or ICCs or effect sizes, like, you could have three people, you could have three different interpretations of what the results of that study are, and we're asking a non-scientifically literate group of people to be able to take in that information and come to their own nuanced perspective on something that's already quite niche, because a paper in of itself, unless it's a meta-analysis or a systematic review, is going to be quite a narrow scope. And I think that's kind of where we're at with our field. And even with what you were saying there, that I think people, at least for us anyway, and definitely myself, that having the knowledge of, I don't know, how motor units are recruited, or the certain I don't know, fucking correlates of exercise adherence in certain populations, having that knowledge doesn't transfer to being a good coach. And that's kind of the hard knowledge and the theory. Like, you being a good coach exists within the Venn diagram of having some knowledge, not being a dickhead, and also being able to apply that to a niche. And I think where we kind of look at niches, it's great to say you're like, some people might be really good PTs and gyms and they might work with Gem Pop, but I think one of the things for me, like, I did strength and conditioning as my undergrad, I never had any interest in working with anybody other than maybe powerlifters and people that were interested in getting really, really strong. my research area is in older adults. It's over 60s. It's people that are coming in with
super similar to the powerlifters then.
yeah, same amount of arthritis and blood pressure. Almost the same amount of statins, but it's like as the people, the impact you can have at a wider level is what's the word I'm looking for? It's not going to come as a result of necessarily just prescribing exercises or telling people what to do. And that's came across in my research as well, where for the most part, people, when we started an intervention, we might have 100 to 120 older adults involved in it. I would say 90% of them come back for, they don't mind the exercise.
Yeah.
They have a bit of crack amongst each other, and they're probably coming back because they were like, oh Jesus, the 2 boys running the studies were actually fairly all right. And that kind of, nice. I think, relays back to what you were saying earlier with the need for people online to get to know you.
Yeah, hugely. And I think in person or online, human connection goes a long way. Like if you were to go and look at research in therapy, for example, one of the things that becomes very, very clear is the importance of the therapist and the patient relationship. Regardless of the type of therapy that is actually administered, like that matters less than that the patient feels cared for and understood by the therapist. And I think that principle carries over to so many things. Like, look, does your client like you? Do they like spending time with you? Do they feel like you have their best interest at heart? If you can create a space where people, pretty much everyone knows exercise is good for them and that they should probably do it. And most people will never love exercise in the way that a fitness professional loves exercise, because otherwise they'd probably be a fitness professional themselves. It's one of those things. I don't love brushing my teeth. I brush my teeth because I kind of have to. I should do it twice a day. I do it once a day, right? And then my girlfriend nags me occasionally into doing the second one, right? Because I'm like, fine. Okay, great. I'm never going to love that process. It's just one of those ones. I know it's good for me. I should do it. Okay, cool. I think most people treat exercise a bit that way. They know it's good for them and they will therefore turn up sometimes. And so if you can create those, if it's in older populations there, if it's a group that they can turn up to that they like hanging around with and the boys are good, they're like, okay, good. And then after they've done it for a few weeks, they start noticing the differences. They feel a little bit better. Maybe their joints don't ache as much as before. And their motivation increases a bit because they're like, oh yeah, I can see why this is worth it. And you know what? It is worth 2 to 3 hours a week or whatever the intervention happens to be. And that's as good as a lot of that stuff gets. And yet so many PTs will then get frustrated with those clients because they're like, they're not changing as much as they should. They need to change more. Why haven't they changed all of the things in their diet? Why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? And I think we make such a mistake of projecting our expectations and experiences onto, especially if you're working with Gen Pop people, onto our clients. And this is, I think, the issue for, say, bodybuilding coaches. Not all of them, of course, but a lot of them struggle when it comes to dealing with people who aren't bodybuilders because it's not as big a part of their life. They're not willing to work their life around their eating and gym schedule, right? It's very much the other way around. So the human connecting with them, the empathy for what their life might be like and what it must be like to live their life and in their shoes is often lacking. And if there's one thing I ever end up talking to younger coaches about when it comes to coaching, it's that client-centric skill of going, whether it's research, whether it's whatever, of going, research can inform what we do. Of course it can, but let's never place it ahead of the client. The client is first, and this stuff, okay, that might be a sensible intervention to try here, or we could pull this in, or that's a sensible number of sets to start with, or whatever it happens to be. But it's always client first, and then we'll figure out how the research informs that, not, well, the research says we have to do this, so I'm going to have to do this regardless of whether my client hates it, likes it, feels irrelevant, blah, 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 blah. It's like you're doing it ass backwards. Listen and pay attention to that individual in front of you first, and then start reaching for what feels relevant and what might be useful for them. Actually, one last line on this, and then I'll stop talking. When I shifted some of my focus from away from trying to be right towards trying to be helpful, I think I made a big difference as a coach. I spent years, I think, wanting to be right, sound smart, almost to prove that PT is a career and it's not just this thing you went into because you weren't sure what else to fucking go and do or la la la. And you know, once you sort of let that go and go, I don't need to be right. I don't have to correct everything my client says that I think is wrong or bollocks, right? My job is to help them with something. Huge shift, at least for me in that.
I suppose that kind of idea of n equals 1, that if you, and I like the idea that, and I think even as a phrase, I think for people that kind of, and I suppose that I quite like you kind of got caught up in the evidence-based space where you, and like, again, I exist in evidence
in that space.
I think in that space, but I think applying that within the coaching sphere is that you're trying to apply best practice, or all of these things are informing your coaching, not the other way around. Where you have this kind of like fixed set of things that have to be followed, and the individualization and that need for even the logistics of a program. It's like, well, you should be having at least 3 times a week frequency here, and the Schoenfeld paper is telling us you need at least 10 sets a week, and all those sets need to be at this RP, and you're, I don't know, nearly insufferable.
I know from the bodybuilding point of view, which you mentioned in regards to, obviously, like, bodybuilding has like different cultures attached with it, and like different like cultural norms attached with it, and fixed mindsets, like dogmatic beliefs. And like, I think, like, as a coach, like, almost like making sure that you are still being well informed by the evolving research is important, so you don't get entrapped by those. Because like, even some of like over like the last few years, like more flexible standards for like protein intakes have come about, right? Like, years ago, it was like, you must be eating, like, high quality protein sources 4 times a day. If you're eating that vegan diet, like, you're fucked for gains, essentially. Whereas like, now it's kind of come out that, like, if you are meeting your total amount, like, even eating like getting your protein across like 2 servings across the day is probably not going to be that much less effective than having 4 servings across the day. And like, having that understanding and kind of updating those beliefs can help you coach people better, versus trying to make people fit into an arbitrary standard that is not necessarily the most up to date. Because like, there has been times in the past where I've almost felt as if I was not able to help clients towards their goal because I couldn't get them to fit within this like set standard, right? And then over time you have to update your beliefs, then you can coach better.
Well, I think that the thing maybe that you touch on within that is arbitrary standard of going, research is great, but we just have to keep in mind the population it's applied to, and where within the hierarchy of importance it lands. Like, protein matters. Of course it matters. Doesn't matter as much as calories matter if we're talking from a fat loss perspective. And am I talking about someone who's obese or someone like yourself who wants to be shredded and jacked, right? The importance you place on it has to reflect who the fuck am I talking to and what are their goals. And yeah, same as yourself. I had Gen Pop clients who I was like, they're just not getting enough protein. Clearly, this is not going to work. It's like, dude, they still lost 20 kilos. Does it really matter that their protein was a bit shy? Or you'll sometimes, and I used to find this with females occasionally, and it depends on what method you use to set your protein, what have you. But you'd end up giving some girl 140 grams of protein a day, and yet her habitual amount is currently like 45, right? The discrepancy in what she currently does and now what you've asked her to do, if she hasn't just decided to become fully bodybuilder mode, which she probably hasn't, is, you're miles away, right? This girl, you might get her to get to 70 to 80, which would be a cool win, right? But you have to then let go of, but then I'm only using 1 gram per kilogram, or maybe less. It's like, yeah, you might be. Doesn't matter. It's fine. For her goal, what we're trying to do, she's going to be fine. She's going to the gym for the first time ever. That's a win, right? She'll build some muscle from that particular thing, most likely. she's actually starting to be a bit more active. She's doing more steps, and she's paying a bit more attention to her food. Maybe she's getting some more fruits and veggies in. It's like, how many wins do you want in a row, or are those not good enough for you at this particular point? And I think we sometimes forget to notice the positive progressions, and we just notice the things they're not doing yet. And it's like, look, if you're going to work with most human beings, one of the worst things that you can do is continually just remind them of all the things they're failing to do while not acknowledging the positive steps they are making.
Yeah, I think even with the bodybuilding sphere, and I do think, well, not just bodybuilding, but I suppose it's easy to watch bodybuilding coaches, but any kind of coach, is the creation of barriers, which is kind of saying to people, you're not getting to your goal fast enough because you're not doing enough in your life, and you're constantly missing the mark, and you're a piece of shit, and that's why your dad left you, and you're gonna die alone. Like, it's
You're gonna die alone.
Like completely catastrophizing a situation where, like you said, and like I love my training. I'm fucking sold. I'm the converted. But if I'm caught for time, like I was in the gym there, got into the gym for half two, had to get through my deadlifts, had to get through my bench, had to get my RDLs done. I was supposed to do a couple of rows. Did I do them? No.
You mean sacked off your rows to come here? Amateur. Yeah. It's like you don't want enough.
And like, it's that message of like you said it there, where Jesus Christ, they're already going, like, they're probably sleeping, they're training 3 or 4 days a week, they're doing they're doing all the low hanging fruit, and I think with where coaches kind of, and I don't know, is it kind of a thing where people don't really think about what they're saying or maybe what they're putting out, but to say to people that are already, if you're trying to get the people that aren't already doing it, they're gone. They're not fucking going. They're out. That they've left the chat.
Yeah.
Like, if I landed into a group of like middle-aged women or a load of lads that had no interest in exercise and just wanted to be out golfing, and I say, you're not fucking working hard enough, you don't really want it. Best like, I'm pissing into the wind.
Yeah.
And I think that, I suppose, I don't know, maybe I'm I don't come across it, but maybe I'm a bit more empathy driven than I thought I was. But like you said it earlier, like if you can't put yourself in the shoes of the people you're working with, I think you're gonna have a bad time, even just relating to people, in general. And
one of the tasks,
maybe that's why their dad left them.
I hope that's why their dad left them. One of the tasks I give to clients sometimes when we're talking about like niche stuff, but I also think is useful for trying to be in the head of other people, is like, can you write a day in the life of your niche? Right? And by day in the life, I mean, like, what time do they get up? And not just what time, what's the first shit that they start thinking about when they open their eyes, when they're in the shower and fucking scrubbing away? Are they stressing about some particular work thing? Is it because they've got to get their kid up in a second and he's not been sleeping that well and he's a little bit ill? Is the wife pissing him off? Is it like the car needs a fucking, right? Yeah. Like, it's the head space of someone. When we talk about niche, really what we're talking about is the psychological thoughts and feelings that make up a human being across the course of a day, a week, in their life. And you're trying to make content to some degree that person reads and go, oh my God, that's kind of me, right? Or that's my life. That, I see how that gets it. The only reason people care about before and after photos is if they think, oh, I could now do that because I see myself in that story, in that journey, in that whatever. But I think that's critical to coaching as well. As you kind of just said, who am I to judge to a large degree how hard someone else's life is? I'm like, I don't fully know what's in there. I think our job to some degree is to judge someone's life a little bit because they've hired us to usually get some kind of result. But I think we have to use the right framings for that judgment. First off, it's a judgment of a subset of their life, not their entire being. So that the fact that they're failing to do one or two things doesn't make them a complete cunt who deserves no love, right? And that their dad should leave, right? That's probably a bit much. That might be funny to say to him, right? So it depends on the kind of client relationship you have, right? So you've got that little bit of going, I'm here to judge them at least from an exercise technique perspective, they want you to judge them. They want you to go, that's right, that's good, that's a bit shit, do this, right? We all, when we hire someone to do something, we want their judgment, but we want it in the right way, in the right manner. And same when it comes to applying nutrition stuff or whatever happens to be going on. I think it's important to remember to judge them with their eyes to some degree, at least when it's not in the gym, and going, are you happy with your effort? Are you happy with your expectation on this? Dan John has a great line that, look at your behaviors, look at your goals, do your behaviors match your goals? And when you hear that, a lot of people go, oh, no, my behaviors don't match my goals. Clearly, I have to change my behaviors. But that's only one way of dealing with that. The other one is you could change your goals, right? Some people set out saying they want to do something because they have no idea what's involved. I like to remind coaches, how many hobbies have you taken up and quit over the course of your life? Because if you're anything like me, it's fucking loads, right? And so I was committed.
I feel so seen there.
Yeah, right. Like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, I did. Right, yeah, or I'll come in phases, and I'll play my guitar for a while, and then I'll stop playing it for a bit, and then I'll pick it up a bit more. And like we've all been capable of saying, yeah, I want to do that thing, and then realizing somewhere along the way that it was harder to integrate it with the rest of our life than we realized, and I'm not doing as much as I think. Well, that could mean that I sack it off completely, or maybe it means I have to adjust my expectation that I'm not going to play like fucking the best bass player of all time within the next year because I'm not practicing like that's going to happen, right? But maybe then my expectation comes down, well, I'd like to just be able to play a few songs. It's like, okay, that's reasonable. Like if someone comes in, they want to be shredded by next week, which is usually what 20-year-olds kind of do. Benefit, by the way, and I'm sure you found this with working older people are way more reasonable with their expectations.
Oh, Jesus. It's reasonable, yeah. It's on the floor.
Yeah, so there might be that thing of like, as long as I'm just not dying, it's fine, right?
Yeah,
I used to joke actually with like long-term clients. If you've had them for like 10 years and they're in person and Gen Pop people, your job is just to help them die less quickly, right? You're helping them die slowly. That's basically they haven't changed physically in 8 years. That's not what they turn up for. They like spending time with you. They know this is good for them. Happy days, and they've got the spare cash and capital to be able to do it. You're like, don't feel too bad about yourself if that's what a long-term client after a few years looks like and turns into, because that is the reality for most of them.
I always kind of think of like, do you know when you think of just like, I remember like I worked in a gym and I used to always come into my head, I was like 20 or 21. I was like, fuck me, like I was working in this gym for a year. It was my first like proper gym job. I was looking at people and I was like, Dave, they haven't changed at all in a year.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck are they doing? And whenever I'm reading a paper and the first couple of, do you know, the first line, like they start like when you're writing an introduction, you go really, really broad and then you narrow it down.
Yeah.
And then I always think of those people, like there's always a line and it's really, really like broad, but it'll say something like physical activity reduces all-cause mortality, and I'm like, there you go. That's the
yeah.
That's the guy.
But the thing is, most of this stuff is and coaching is done by 20-year-olds, really, and 20-year-olds have so little in common with a 60-year-old that they really struggle to see the world through that other set of eyes and go, that is the projection of the 20-year-old onto a 60-year-old and be like, why have they not changed? I can't see anything. I'd be fucking well disappointed if I was them. So, yeah, of course you would. You're fucking 20, right? They ain't, and that's the more important part of this job. Your job as a PT is not to project what you want onto your client. It's to help your client facilitate whatever the fuck they want, as long as it's not drowning kittens, right? That's the gig. I mean, and even then, if you hate kittens, have at it. But like but I think that's maybe almost an inevitability of being young, and just getting a little older and learning some of those bits, because those bits have nothing directly to do with your understanding of anatomy and physiology or training. They're life skills that come along for the ride. When you, like, I would say sometimes I learned more through therapy. I learned more about coaching through therapy than I ever did on any course that I ever went through, because that stuff was very useful in learning to understand your own thought processes, how you come to feel and think the way you do about stuff, and then being able to almost try and apply that to other people a little bit and go, how could they be thinking and feeling in this thing? What would have happened to get to that? If I was, what would that be like? Right. And you still have the initial judgment that you do, because every human does. If you've had a client for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, and every week that client comes in and says, yeah, no, it's been a bit of a shit week. Nothing, I've fucked up. I did this. You're like, okay, right. Then you try and evaluate what went on for them and see if you can come up with a little tweak to the plan or a better way of doing things. And they're like, yeah, no, that sounds good. And you're like, cool, I think I got through to them. And then they come back the next week. Yeah, if it didn't work, everything's gone terribly. Nothing's gone right. Right. And you do that process for fucking 6 weeks. And you will be frustrated because you're like, I care more than this twat cares, right? I'm having conversations with myself in the shower about what maybe I could have said to them that would magically change their life, and it fucking ain't working, right? And maybe I'm a shit coach, maybe they're a prick, maybe they don't want, like, you have all these things that go on. And so I think it's okay to be frustrated with your clients sometimes, and it's okay to voice that you're a bit frustrated, but you have to make sure you've gone through the right processes to warrant that frustration. Like, if you've been trying for 6 weeks, a couple of months, and you've tried loads of different approaches, and you've tried being reasonable and understanding, and you've tried a small kick in the ass, and you've tried every approach you can physically think of, and this person isn't changing, you're allowed to then go, man, I'm fucking frustrated. I don't know about you, but I feel like we've been trying all these different things, and every week I'm like, yes, and then everything's fucking not happening. Like, what do you think? And so you can voice that back. It's not your job to just lie to them, but you've got to find a way to frame it in the right way. And it can't be like, week 1, they fucked up. You're a fucking disappointment. Your mother should have left you in a gutter, right? It can't be, you can't jump immediately to that point.
No, it's probably one of the things I think some online coaches struggle with, because like, you're looking at content from a 20-something-year-old with no kids, no mortgage, like works from home, doesn't do like whatever, like all of the like copious lists of things that can get in the way of someone getting like jacked or shredded or whatever. And I think where, like, you know, that like everyone makes a joke out of like online coaches being like, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, and it's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Like, the man in the iron lung died there last week, and 24 hours in that fucking thing. It's
of all the references you could have just used, that is my favorite one.
But genuinely, like I mean,
he became a lawyer. Did you know that?
What?
In the iron lung, he practiced law.
How was that man hauled into fucking court? Could you imagine this cunt? Could you imagine that cunt coming out to give your defense like fucking Darth Vader? No, like there's no way that lad is gonna.
I mean, I don't know that he was in the courtroom, but yeah, by one of the things I read, he trained as a lawyer. It's like, that's fair play to him. 70 years he was in that fucking iron lung. Oh,
fucking yeah. But he had the same 24 hours in the day.
Exactly. It's actually one of the things I've scribbled down on the content ideas at one point was like taking the piss out of a day in the life of someone when they say those bits. Or like just pretend for a day, online coach person, that you have kids and you have all these bits. I want you to get up at 6 a.m., right? And then you have to go and do a bunch of tasks. Then I want you to then sit at a desk from 9 till 5 with a small break for lunch. That's all you can do. Then I want you to go to the gym when it's at peak time and it's really busy and you can't get on half the shit that you want to do. And then I want you to get back home by whatever time. And then I want you to make dinner for multiple people and blah, 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 blah. And do that for just a couple of days. And then tell me we're very lucky to have online coaching type lives or PT lives and to be able to structure some of the stuff we do around things. Like PTs can take 2 hours in the gym if they want to. They can go to the gym when it's nice and quiet and no one else is there. You know, they often treat scheduling meal prep and going to the gym as their career, right? They treat that bit professionally. That bit's scheduled, it's not missed, it's done every time. But if you're asking them like, well, how, do you walk the gym floor and talk to people you don't know and try and help them? No, I would never do such a fucking thing. That would be a terrible idea for a business. Right? Or like, do you ever plan out your content? Do you write down? Do you sit and do you schedule it? No, I can't do this. It's like, okay, so the only bit in your fucking life that you're treating professionally is basically your meal prep and your training times, and the rest is winged, and you're wondering why you don't have a career yet. It's like, well, it should be self-evident if you properly reflected.
But even in the, I suppose at the other end of it then as well, you have some coaches that will probably do really, really well. Like you can think of the, I don't know, 20-something-year-old out in Dubai, living the high life, and there probably is that little bit of confirmation bias or survivorship bias that probably does come into it, which is like, yeah, I tell these lazy cunts, get up off their hole, and it's like, and it works.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's where, at what, like, how long is that going to last in our area? Because people, like, you're eventually going to be 40 something, 50 something, all going well, barring you kick the bucket and exercise doesn't reduce all cause mortality, as it turns
Doesn't reduce
out.
bullshit wounds. I was going to say bullet wounds. I said bullshit wounds.
Yeah.
Ice baths will help. So that's the thing.
That's also true.
The ice bath will help. Good. Yeah.
But like, there will come a point where you'll be a 40-something-year-old lad, and that's like, if you've taken enough gear, growth, and insulin to bet the band, by the time you get to 50, you could be a lot worse for wear than the average PT. And like, how are you going to shift the goalpost then back to, maybe you might have to be more gen pop, you might have to work with, you might have spent and I think that's kind of maybe where the identity thing, we always talk about like athletic identity, like me and Shane talk a lot about it, and we had a guy on there recently who had like a brain injury. He was playing really high level rugby and just had to stop, and his life was, he was pretty affected by it, but he turned it around, and he was like, the kind of the unidimensionality of being an athlete just doesn't work. It's not conducive to kind of being more a rounded person. And I think even as a coach, it's very easy to get caught up in your niche, and like you were saying earlier, where like, if you're a bodybuilder and you have this passion, and it's an obsessive passion, it's not necessarily a harmonious passion, you can kind of find that the expectations of you and your clients, or maybe yourself, becomes an echo chamber, where all of a sudden all of your friends are bodybuilders. You socialize with bodybuilders, and I've definitely fallen into that trap where, like, and Shane was probably the same at one stage when he was here in Ireland, where we got so desensitized to strong people, because you walk in and Jake Brennan squatting 400 kilos, Eamon squatting 380, Jura squatting 330, Ben squatting 350, Killian squatting 300, and you're like, right,
just a casual Tuesday.
Yeah, and I think that's where, I suppose, the looking at a mum, or when none of your friends have kids, and maybe you don't have brothers or sisters, it's quite hard to conceptualize what that life might look like for someone. And I think even in my own coaching, I've found that, like, I'm coach, and then with the PhD, it's kind of like, you can bar when you're teaching, it's kind of like do your own shit in your own hours. And I think for me, even like coming away from the evidence-based thing and just being like, look, when you're on the days you're working, we're going to have to start with way less than what I typically or I might think you might need to progress.
Yeah, I think I've now forgotten whatever point I was about to say. That's a good start. What are you saying? There's a massive win on my end. What was remind me of the last sentence that just came out of your mouth?
Just where, like, for me, when you have that kind of like
flexible... the identity. Got it.
Yeah.
There you go. You know when your brain goes tip tip tip, and then nothing was in it. I was like, you know when you start talking a sentence, hoping it comes back to you partway through the sentence, and it didn't. So then I was like, I got nothing. Yeah, the sort of, I like the phrase, the unidimensionality or something like that you said for an identity, because it's a super common one for athletes for sure, but you see it in multiple facets. Like the mortality rate when people retire goes up fucking loads, and I think in large part that's because their identity is your job, because whatever you do becomes a part of you to some degree. Your identity is this hard to pin down thing. It's a slightly malleable thing, and it has to be scaffolded onto something. And whether it's, you know, mothers who identify just mainly as a mother and then the kids grow up and leave, or athletes who retire because of a, you know, traumatic brain injury or because their career has naturally come to the end, and then there's the identity crisis of who am I now? Like that's a huge thing. And if almost all of your identity is in one thing, it's just like a high risk asset, right? That great if it pays off and you become CBUM, you're all in on that thing and you make mills and happy days. Like, great. Most people aren't going to be that. And so that survivorship bias that you kind of mentioned earlier of like, we get a few people who took this approach and did super well. That's all great, but you don't see the graveyard of identities that fucking had a horrible time because they tried to follow this same path and they didn't have the genetics or the geography to make those particular kind of things work. And I think for most people, we are better off trying to have multiple dimensions to that identity that we have. So some of it might be bodybuilding or powerlifting or whatever it is within fitness that is your thing. Some of it should be your job and your career, because that's going to be true for everyone. But the amount of people who don't have hobbies sometimes blows my mind. And like, what do you do for fun that doesn't involve cake or alcohol? And there's often a fucking dead silence and some tumbleweeds. It's like, you know, I play music. I think music's great for a lot of people because it can be a lifelong hobby, but not everyone is into that thing. I'm a history nerd, but you could get into kind of reading, get into, I don't know, you go collect rocks if you want, right? Go hiking, go play squat. Like, I don't care what you pick. I play video games as well. Do that. Like, but you have to have, I think, a slight diversity of interests just to stay sane as you age. And it will be interesting to see those Dubai-based influencer people who tell everyone to get off their hole and go and train, see what happens as they get a little older. They will likely evolve because all human beings evolve a little bit. So I think they will make those pivots as they go through, but there will be definitely a whole bunch of identity crises along the way with that. And then with regards to the speaking into the echo chamber, I think one of the problems that a lot of coaches have is they consume other coaches' content and then regurgitate it to people who aren't coaches. So the bodybuilding space can have a bunch of people in it if their audience is also bodybuilders, where because basically they're telling themselves that they're awesome. You just got to want it. You got to get up, right? And off they go. And other bodybuilders who go, yeah, I'm a fucking wolf. I get in the gym and I kill it, right? They share that as well because, as I said earlier, people share stuff that they wish they'd said themselves that they think, I've already thought this, right? So bodybuilders whose audience are other bodybuilders, that message works because all the other bodybuilders already think that. That is shit that goes on in their head and they're like, yeah, right? So that's fine if that's your audience. But if you don't recognize that you as the other level bodybuilder whose audience are not bodybuilders, if you try and take that same approach, you're just going to come across as a patronizing arsehole, right? Who's telling people with kids that they're lazy. And that's probably not going to work that well because most people don't want to watch content that they feel is lecturing them or, you know, condescending to them in some way. And so you just got, again, it comes back to knowing who you're talking to and about what to try and figure, I think, some of that stuff out.
Yeah. I always wonder about the coaches and I'm always weary of like transformations, and even with powerlifting it's not as apparent because it's like it's very rare you'll kind of be like, okay, here was someone's deadlift 10 years ago and here's someone's deadlift now and then you're going to be like, wow, he's gained so much strength.
You want to get on his 10-year deadlift program.
Yeah, and it's like everybody, anyone that's going to be looking at it being like, yeah, he's been doing that shit for 10 years. I hope he got fucking better. But for some reason with transformations, where like, okay, Ben was really fat, really ugly and pathetic 12 weeks ago. Look how he's turned his life around and he's less fat and less pathetic and less awful to look at. But people are like, yeah, give me some of that. And it's, I do wonder though, is it with the transformations, and you'll probably have a far more nuanced, in-depth perspective on this than me. I
better now, otherwise I'm going to fuck this up.
Yeah. But I always wonder, is that a product of the type of person and maybe is it a product of the type of person that is being drawn into it, or is it a byproduct of what coaches are putting out? Because a lot of the time I find with transfer, like these kind of, again, I'm not trying to lump people in, but a lot of the time with transformations, anyone I know of that has centered their business around that, or anyone I know who has gone to a coach being like, I need to change my shit, the expiry date on that is anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Kind of once they see the result, they realize. And like, it's one thing Shane definitely got me thinking a lot about in our kind of discussions and kind of earlier on when I started coaching, was the value set, and maybe that the you can see the change, but that change necessarily mightn't have been of any value to you to start. You just might have been like, this is cool, and I'm just gonna do this thing.
So I think there's multiple things in that. I think transformations will always sell because we are a sexually selective species, and therefore we will always care about our appearance. And abs are sexier than a beer belly. Otherwise, Channing Tatum would not have played Magic Mike. All right. Barry from EastEnders would have played Magic Mike, and that is sadly for Barry, not what happened. So I think the being human means we care about status, and we care about status for sexual selection reasons, and we care therefore about appearance for sexual selection reasons. No one thinks that necessarily consciously. I'm not saying people are sat there being like, I'm going to get in shape for better sexual selection and mate selection. Like I don't think anyone's doing it, but they're driven. They're driven to. They don't think of it in those words. They would think of it as like, I'm gonna be more fuckable and girls will like me, right? And
that's
what they'll think, right? And that's fine. So I don't think that will ever change any more than people buy a Rolex not to tell the time because a Casio tells the time, right? They buy a Rolex for status, because we therefore appear better in other people's eyes. Human beings, I don't think, are ever going to change from that unless we evolve slightly. And I doubt that, because I don't see why that would occur. So I think there will always be an audience for it. And therefore selling transformations is almost universally always going to be a thing. Especially as we get bigger as a species. I don't see us not wanting that. As far as then, does it have the expiry of like, you get the transformation and then you go back to what you were doing and turn back into the person who needed the transformation in the first instance? That, I think, is influenced by several things. One is the quality of the coaching, which does influence the likelihood of a person going back to where they started. I think it does influence that. And poor coaching will make it more likely that someone is put on the type of approach that they're just desperate to get out of at the end of it and go immediately back to stuff. But I also think even if you're a great coach and you try and make it as personalized for someone, as flexible, as easy to follow, as all the things you could want a person to have in a program, you can't make someone want something. If we could make people want things, our job would be very easy. I can't make you want something. And so if you came in wanting to just look that way for a holiday, for a wedding, for a whatever, and then you achieve that thing, and then you go back to whatever you went back to, I can't make you want to do that differently. So I think as coaches, we influence behavior, but we never determine behavior. I can never it's one of the questions you sometimes get from coaches. What could I say to make them change? I'm like, I don't know. What could I say to you to make you change? Right? I like history. I like the Romans. I'm very happy to read about Julius Caesar and one of the civil wars. What would I have to say to you, a person who's not interested in history and could give a fuck about Julius Caesar, to make you care as deeply as I do about Julius Caesar? It's like probably nothing, because I'm fucking not interested in Julius Caesar, right? Like a geologist could start telling me about rocks with all the passion under the sun. I don't care about rocks. Rocks are boring. Rocks can fuck off, right? Someone talking, well about rocks, I might pay attention to him for a few more minutes, but I don't know that I can instill a passion to want those things. So the short answer is I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to have people so good that they can make everyone who goes into a transformation sustain a good outcome at the end of it. But I do think that better coaches will have a higher percentage of people not going backwards quite as much. That's probably what I would say on that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate description of it. I suppose when I always look at it, I'm always kind of curious as to what the kind of long-term ramifications of it are, because it's like to get from, and I suppose the more extreme the result and in the shorter of the time, the more of a lifestyle overhaul that the person must have committed to. And I mean, like, you do look at some like before and afters, and you go like, what the fuck? Just, and like drugs, or regardless, or whatever, there has to have been a serious change there. But for that person, is exercise viewed as a vehicle that needs to be driven at 100 miles an hour? Is diet, is tracking your food something that needs to be an all or nothing? And that's kind of, I suppose, maybe where that sphere lends itself to, is existing within the extremes and looking for that extreme result, because no one gives a fuck about a transformation being like, Jenny went from not training at all, she found green vegetables icky, and she wouldn't squat because she was afraid of falling over, and now she's eating peas and broccoli with some butter, and she'll do her squats, and she's lost 0.5 kilo in 8 weeks.
Yep.
Like, it's, and like, I suppose where you said about the sexual selection thing and that kind of, I suppose I'd never thought about it within that sphere, and I suppose looking big and jacked and having a big arse is probably a status symbol that will just exist forever. I mean, if you're going to go out and get a BBL, it probably says enough.
Yeah, well, I think guys have it. I laughed really weirdly there. Guys have it a little bit easier, I think, than females with the physique stuff to some degree, in that it is still considered manly to be like chunky and thick, but it's very rarely considered feminine to be like carrying that extra powerlifting weight. That's not usually a thing. So guys, it can be great to be both thick and muscular and also shredded. For females, it tends to only be on that kind of leaner side most of the time, which means there's often a fear of the gaining phases, letting go. Often as well, when people first get into that, if they've never had that many compliments and stuff in their life, it is quite intoxicating when people start complimenting you. And that plays a huge role in identity. And then when you have to let go of that identity, again, we see another big identity crisis occur here. So I think you possibly see issues at different stages. So the younger person who wasn't particularly attractive through their teenage years, through their formative years, maybe into their early 20s, who then starts getting in shape through that. And I'm thinking mainly of like bikini girls here, but it does apply to guys as well. That becomes, this is great. Finally, I'm one of the attractive ones and I'm getting the attention and I'm doing this. And again, I'm not saying they consciously think this directly, but it becomes intoxicating. And then when the prep is over and you have to gain some weight, well, we have a negativity bias anyway. We're more driven by negative emotion than positive emotion, which is one of the reasons that when you look at marketing, pain points are more effective than like aspiration points, because we are driven by those. To escape something painful is better than to attain something nice. I often, by the way, I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes losing the last 5 pounds is quite hard, is that you're not as motivated because the pain isn't as high as when you started, right? So sometimes that's a thing. So you have the younger person's identity crisis that occurs. You sometimes, and that has more psychological consequences than physiological ones, unless it turns into a full-blown eating disorder and leads down the anorexic route or the bulimic route. Whichever eating disorder we start kind of going down, there are physiological consequences for that as well, especially for the anorexics. So there's both psychological and physiological difficulty there. Then I suppose you fast forward a bunch of time and you're looking at, like, I don't know, the 40-year-olds who lose drastic amounts of weight in a short period of time. The Biggest Loser type thing is what I've kind of got in my head for that. And absolutely, you could definitely see some physiological, probably, and some psychological kind of things from there. So it's always awkward, isn't it? Because long-term successful weight loss is often associated with fast weight loss initially, because it's more it's like, oh, I can do this, this is motivating, this is rewarding, and that reinforces the desire. It then has to become and evolve something more sustainable somewhere along the way for that, and it doesn't always. And again, I would go back to good coaching increases the likelihood of better outcomes, but it never guarantees it. And then sometimes you've got, well, if someone used a transform thing and then figured their life out and then sort of sustained some stuff and kept it going through the older age, I don't know that then comes at any cost that you'd be particularly kind of worried about. So I think the main worries I have with transformations are psychological and eating disorders, in the younger group primarily, and then possibly some of the physiological ones that you might run into with Biggest Loser type things. But they're actually I think they're quite rare to get a 40-something-year-old with kids and a bunch of stuff to be able to run themselves into the ground in the Biggest Loser style for most people's life. Not impossible. You'll definitely find some, I'm sure. But I probably see fewer of those. That could just be me, though.
Yeah. I suppose I'm thinking about maybe coaching, but also like the Biggest Loser, what else? That kind of like even like Slimming World or any of these things. Like I think a lot, like when we think about, like, we can complain about like bad coaching or whatever, but then I suppose when you come out of it and you realize the amount of people that are actively involved in Weight Watchers and Slimming World, and are like it at a mass level, maybe in the UK and Ireland, I think a lot of people would kind of shit themselves. And like you said earlier, with that amount of people involved in those programs, I think most coaches, or at least personal trainers, will never be short of clients.
No, I think with Weight Watchers and stuff, there are things we can learn from Weight Watchers that are good from at least their marketing perspective. The language that they use, how they talk to people, having a whole bunch of recipe stuff that are easy, accessible, that you can learn lots from that type of stuff. How they then deliver some of it, we would obviously have differences in mass weighings of people, and that being the sole focus, and sins being a thing for food, and all of those bits where you go, yeah, I don't love the way they deliver with either of those kind of guys, how they deliver stuff. Maybe it's a bit like when you see those coaches at gyms who are shit coaches, but they're always busy because they're great with people, right? Which exist in every gym under the sun. Coaches who like science are often like annoyed by those people and irritated by them because they're fucking shit. Why are they busy? It's like, yes, they are shit at that bit, but they're really good at this bit, and you're not. And you actually need to learn from why is Eddie Abu successful, right? Why is he doing well? It's great I enjoy making reactions to his shit because it's retarded and it's therefore funny to take the piss out of. But you could also look at it through what is he doing well from a content creation perspective? I think sometimes even the things we dislike, if they are popular, we have to be able to look at them and try and go, what can I learn from this? And might I be able to bring into my own approach to improve not necessarily how I deliver my coaching, but how I get people in, so that then they don't have to go to fucking Weight Watchers and have this shit experience. I can give them something better than this that's more sustainable and effective. I think it's trying to look at the world through those kind of lenses.
I think in regards to like the transformation process, I think the approach I would generally try to go with a client is like they come in to you initially and they have like a low amount of skills, like they don't have much tools in the tool belt or kind of ideas as to how to progress further. They don't have the result they want, and then they probably place more emphasis or more value on like the end product versus everything else that is needed to get there. And then obviously the process over time is you want them to get the result, obviously, but you want to enhance their tools, and you want to show them the value or help them come to understanding the value of all the other things that are leading to the result. And naturally, as you mentioned, like over time, like the person who's going to be with you for a few years, they're probably going to get their best results initially, and then over time they might start to plateau or slightly revert, but you would hope that by that end point they still have they have the skills built, and they have like the value is kind of placed on, like, the process of getting results. So if they ever do want to go towards that more extreme in the future, they can. Because, like, realistically, like, I don't know if anybody does like a transformation, a 12-week transformation, get shredded, and then just maintains that year round. Like, most people do have some kind of like reversion, but they probably place more emphasis or more value on other aspects of life. And obviously, if you're getting coached well, you probably understand how exactly you could get back to that place in a relatively painless or less painful time than the first time.
Yeah, I think you find a bunch of different stuff. Arguably my best transformation is a lady called Chris. And Chris, her transformation was from like 100 kilos down to like 57 and photo shoot. And she was 60 years old, had breast cancer in that time, had half her thyroid taken out, had a dodgy hip for 30 years from a skiing accident, had 2 grown-up kids. When I say grown-up, was still kind of like living at hers, and then her ex-husband's, their dad's split time kind of thing, but they were in their late teens, early 20s type thing. Was the chief operator. Yeah, she was the chief operating officer, CAO for the Civil Aviation Authority. There's too many C's, O's, and A's in that description. COO of the CAA. Within that, so busy lady. And her transformation was really over 3 years, because what it actually was going from just like 99.6 kilos down to about 70 kilos in 9 months. And then we sort of stayed there for about 2 years, like small fluctuation up, small fluctuation down, the kind of maintenance that most people are doing, a little bit of weight gain at Christmas, little diet off in January, but pretty happy with kind of where she was, getting gradually stronger, being someone who exercised more, blah, blah, blah. And I had other clients who were doing photo shoots. I was competing and stuff myself kind of around that time. And so she was like, well, I've been thinking about this photo shoot idea, right? And she toyed with saying that for the best part of a year before we actually went, okay, let's do it. And then the next bit was just over 10 kilos coming off from that point to the photo shoot point in like a 16-week kind of prep thing for that. So the transformation that you see is like, well, it's 3 years, but it's also, if I condensed all the dieting, it's probably less than a year of actual dieting, but then there's this 2-year maintenance-y kind of thing in it. And, as I say, in that time, okay, there's breast cancer that had to kind of be removed. There's half a thyroid that has to go out and someone get on thyroxine. And there's all these other bits going on in their life. Sometimes you'll have clients as well who seem like they're going nowhere for ages. And then all of a sudden have a moment where something clicks. That could be because they got dumped. Sometimes that happens, right? Or you might have someone who's doing really well and then they get dumped and then it derails everything. And then they're all like, people really vary in how they respond to all of this stuff. And it does mean you kind of have to go in with sort of open eyes and ears and feel your way around that kind of shit and go like, do they want to push on now? Are they okay with this? Again, rather than bringing your expectations and projecting it onto them, checking in with them. Are you happy with how this is going? Have periodic reviews with people on this kind of stuff where you actually ask them, right? And like, you should do it with exercises. How much do you like this exercise? Like, when it comes time to write a new program, check in with them. Do they actually fucking like? I mean, you should be checking in anyway with conversation, right? But you can actually kind of rate those things, chuck stuff in and out that they do and don't like. Have a bit of a review of what's going well. If their nutrition is a thing, don't do it as just part of the session. Go and sit down in a room for 15 to 30 minutes and actually plan and do stuff and try and understand. When people eat, they don't just eat in response to hunger. They eat in response to boredom and loneliness and a whole manner of other stuff. And so having a discussion about the satiating effect of potatoes is not going to help someone if they're, overeating at night because they're lonely, right? You need to have a different discussion. They need other things that go on in that bit. And so all of this goes into the art of PT and those people who will sometimes come in and transform and then sustain it. Some will come in, transform, sustain it, and then something shit will happen in their life, and who knows where that goes. Some will go nowhere for a bit and then suddenly go somewhere. Some will go nowhere and continue to go nowhere for the entire time that you work with them. There's such a mixed bag of people that you work with. I had a lady once who came and she started working with me, and she drank too much, right? So she was carrying a bit more weight than she liked. She wasn't particularly big, but she was probably 10 kilos bigger than she wanted to be. And you have the natter and try and figure out what's kind of going on, what's been happening in their life. And she's like, I mainly just drink too much wine. You're like, okay, cool, right? Well, the obvious suggestion that comes up in everyone's head at that point would be, well, clearly we need to cut back on the wine then, right? That's the most likely of these ones, unless it's not just the wine, it's also what she eats when she has the wine. Who knows? And you're trying to figure that stuff out. But actually, the reason she drank too much wine was because her husband had died. So if we cut the wine out, what am I asking her to sit with in an evening? What the fuck at 26 years old would I know about that pain and what the hell that's like? At 35, I still don't know what that pain is like. And maybe it was good enough for her to come to the gym for a bit for the first time and us just be doing that. And she knew she drank too much. She told me. It's not like me going, well, we have to cut back on the wine. It's like, she fucking knows, right? Like, these are the realities, I think, of actual PT that make up why it's really hard sometimes to give definitive answers to, is this good? Is this bad? Is this, is this that? It's like, man, people have such nuanced lives that trying to blanket any of it becomes just an exercise in futility.
I think one of the hardest parts I find of working with older adults, and I suppose where you kind of said there's like, we would have people where they come into the program and their husband passes away.
Yeah.
There's a hugely life-altering event, and they've already done the hard part. They've been exercising for X amount of time, but maybe they were, and like, this sounds really funny, but maybe they were exercising because he was wrecking their fucking head. So
yeah.
They were like, right, I'm going to leave the house. Or they were, maybe they were, it was their, they can't drive. So,
yeah.
I think with the more, I know this sounds quite funny to say, but the further you move away from performance, the harder the job is.
Yeah.
I think with,
yeah.
And that sounds quite, I know that sounds quite funny to say, but when you get into the nitty gritty of why people's lifestyles aren't maybe congruent to them losing some fat or building some muscle, I think that becomes a much heavier job. And I do think with personal training and online coaching, if you're not willing to put yourself out there, but also to genuinely listen to people and take that on, I think you're probably in the wrong job, because you don't know when someone signs up with you, I'm doing this because my dad died, and you're kind of going like, Jesus.
Go.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been in a similar situation. So has Shane, where you ask the question that you know you should be asking, but you end up having a conversation that you absolutely did not anticipate.
Yep.
And I've very rarely or never been in a performance setting where, okay, I'm going to walk into this team, I need to get them fitter and stronger, or this guy wants to squat 300 kilos. That nearly boils down to just programming. They're already, the low-hanging fruit is there. They're already adherent. They're already committed. They're motivated. But it's the people where you're kind of going like, okay, so what's going on that you didn't train at all this week? What's going on? That's the crux of it, I think. And that's kind of where I think if people are exposed to less good coaches, I do worry about those conversations and the ramifications of them.
For sure. Like, I completely agree with that. We often treat, training the athletes, the high level people. We even use it in the phrasing, right? As like, that's the pinnacle. That's requires the greatest skill. I'm like, I think you can make an argument that freaks will take care of themselves, right? And often your job is not to fuck them up, right? And they're pretty easy to coach, right? It's the accountants who move like dog shit, who have just lives that sometimes will make you cry just when they tell you little bits of it, that you require such a broad skill set to be able to work with that group of people we often demean and call Gen Pop. But they are 99.9% of the audience that you will work with as a PT, especially in person. And that's why it's so hard, because you need some nutrition skills, you need training skills, you definitely need listening skills and people skills, you need some programming skills, you might need some marketing and business skills. Like, you need such a broad array of shit to be able to work with this wide variety of people whose maybe their husband has passed away and now they can't get to the gym because he drove them there, all the way through to 25-year-olds who maybe first getting into the gym. They don't want to be particularly shredded yet, but they're nervous to kind of go in, to people with social anxiety, to people with kids, to people coming back from illnesses and surgeries. Like, it's one of the great privileges, I actually think, of the job, that you get to be a part of people's lives in a way that you really don't in too many jobs. Like, I've been to clients' weddings, I've held their kids, I've been around while people have gone through divorces. I've had innumerable sessions where clients have cried for a whole variety of reasons. I'm getting emotional now. I've cried with clients. Like, they've been there for me at times, and it's one of the beauties of the job. It's also what makes it hard, and very difficult. And God, it'd be a lot easier if it was just about the programming.
Yeah, the science, I think, that really draws me to the job. I suppose I use the term loosely. I think it's the loveliness of being able to have a conversation, have all of this theory driven practice going around in the background, but for the most part, I think one of the most rewarding things by and large is just someone kind of being like, oh, I felt like shit coming in, but actually, do you know what, the world is a brighter place after doing this 45-minute session, and fuck me if that doesn't get you out of bed in the morning, and I don't know what will.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, I am just conscious of time. I think we've nearly been on the call for 2 hours.
It's been a longer one.
Yeah,
but I've enjoyed it. It's been good.
It's been great. Thanks so much for coming on. It was an absolutely brilliant conversation. But where can people find you? So you're obviously active on Instagram.
Yeah.
But are you?
I was going to give them my home address and just tell them to turn up. That was so so yeah, Instagram is the easiest place to find me. Just search Paul Standell, Standell, and you find us on there. Or the PT Project is the company I run with my business partner and friend James. So those would be the easiest places to get hold of us.
Deadly.
Real.
So if you've enjoyed the podcast, be sure to give Paul a follow. He definitely puts out some very, very good information and some stuff that'll make you laugh when you're taking shite. But also, if you like listening to the podcast, give us a like, share, repost it on all of the platforms. Thanks for listening.